build a life around the things that you truly care about. And when we talked earlier about me stepping off this path that I was walking down, a big reason that I did that was because I recognized that the scoreboard, the default scoreboard that we all embrace of measuring ourselves on the basis of money, was broken. Money isn't nothing, it simply can't be the only thing. It is kind of a tool, but not the goal. It is one piece of a wealthy life, but it is not the entirety. And you need to create a new scoreboard. You need to measure yourself across the broader war that you were trying to win in life, if you will. If you only measure for this one battle of making money, you may win that battle, but you are very likely going to lose the broader war, which is all about your actual happiness and fulfillment as a human being. And so the book is a guide to doing that, to asking the right questions, to measuring the right things across this broader set of pillars that contribute to a wealthy life.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I'd like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. I'm very excited for today's episode. I have got on a brilliant guest. He is an entrepreneur, he's an investor, he is a writer, all around nice guy, and author of the new book, The 5 Types of Wealth. And this is Sahil Bloom. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a thrill to be here.
Awesome. Sahil, we were just saying that I've been following you online for a couple of years. I love the stuff that you put out there, and it feels long overdue to finally have you on the podcast. So, for people who are not familiar with you, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. And I totally agree and would echo that. It does feel like a long time coming. Thrilled to be able to do it. I am, as you said, a writer mostly, and first and foremost, a writer. I share, generally speaking, ideas related to living a healthier, wealthier life. Is how I like to define it and think about it. And that goes across a handful of platforms. The primary one historically has been Twitter. Then I launched a newsletter that now reaches about 1 million people twice a week. And now I have my first book coming out. So I guess I can finally officially say that I'm an author, which is very exciting. And prior to that, I have spent my whole career in the world of investing. So I worked in private equity for the first 7 years of my career. And now I have a venture fund that I invest out of, all early stage technology stuff. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
This episode is brought to you by Sambrosa, the best way to get your 8 hours of rest. If, like me, you sometimes struggle with nighttime restlessness and allergies, then Sambrosa Night Syrup could be a game changer for you. Sambrosa contains a natural base of 7 organic herbs, honey, and a small amount of antihistamine. It's effective and soothing with no harsh chemicals, no high fructose corn syrup, and no artificial flavors or dyes. I've been using Sambrosa for several months now, and I can personally vouch for its effectiveness when it comes to improving my quality of rest at night. I also love the fact that they're a family-owned company who share my values of faith, freedom, and integrity. My listeners can try Sambrosa today and get 10% off by going to sambrosa.com/Zuby10. That's SAMBROSA.com/Zuby10 for 10% off your order. Try Sambrosa today and wake up ready to embrace life's opportunities. Go to sambrosa.com/Zuby10 and try it out. I think a lot of people know who you are now and they see all the stuff you're doing now, but I always like to go back a little bit further rather than sort of starting the story at the end. So tell me about your life. Tell me about growing up and your family.
Sure. And I actually think it's important as it relates to everyone's journey. But, in particular, I feel like a lot of my own story and especially my recent years and the transitions that I've made does tie back to my parents and their journey. And, I come from a mixed race background. So my mom was born and raised in Bangalore, India. And my father is white from the Bronx, New York. And they crossed over by about a 2 week period, I believe, in 1980. My mom had gotten a scholarship to come and study in the United States. She was at Princeton doing a master's degree. My dad was finishing his PhD there. My mom was working in the library to pay her way through school, and they crossed paths. And she asked him on a date, and they went out on this date. And my dad, on the first date, was bold enough to say, "My father will never accept us." And my mom was so blinded by his use of the word us that she completely missed the message. And unfortunately, my dad was right. His dad was not accepting of the idea of my dad dating this Indian woman and made him choose and forced him to choose between his family and my mom. And my dad walked out the door and never saw his family again. So to this day, I never met my dad's parents. He has 3 siblings I've never met. I have first cousins out there in the world somewhere that I've never met. Um, all through this, single decision that my dad made to choose love, to sort of reject the common convention, reject this default path that his father was trying to hand to him and force upon him, and to choose his own way. And I feel like that DNA and the lineage of that decision has sort of rippled through my own life and some of the decisions that I've made more recently to step off the path that I felt was handed to me. Um, so that was a really formative event, just from a life standpoint. I think as parents, and if there are any parents out there, or if you've just been parented in some way, I tend to think that you either reject or amplify what you received from your parents, in terms of the love, support, etc. And I think my dad, as a result of that experience with his father, ended up rejecting so much of what he had experienced so that he became the most supportive, loving father that I could imagine having. My dad is my best friend, was always the first person in my corner, no matter what it was, what twists or turns my life had, he was going to be there to support me. And I'm very blessed for that. That was one of the biggest gifts I feel like I've been given. Um, so I grew up in a very academically oriented household. My dad's a professor at Harvard. My mom is Indian, very academic culture. And I was kind of the kid that was screwing around. My older sister, was very academically oriented. She was like, I still think to this day, she might have the highest GPA in our high school's history. I was the younger brother who would come along a couple of years later and disappoint all the teachers. I started growing to resent my sister as a result of that. That ended up creating a lot of tension in our relationship in both directions, unfortunately. That has now been remedied, but for many years was a really tough thing. And I kind of found my footing to find my own way around sports. I really worked hard at baseball. That was the one sport that really clicked for me. And I got a scholarship to play at Stanford. I had okay grades. I had no business getting into Stanford, but for the fact that I could throw a baseball pretty hard, and that was a skill that they valued. Again, like a very positive turn of fortune there. Got the scholarship, went out to California, played baseball there for 4 years, had a great experience, and then ended up starting my career.
There are so many potential directions to go on that one because that story you just said about your dad and his dad, that is crazy. That is crazy. You hear these things, but and you said that is still the case. So you have members on that side of the family that to this day you have not met.
Yeah, all of them. It was truly a clean break. I am not aware of my dad ever having contact again after that moment. I certainly didn't. His father passed away maybe 15 years ago now, maybe a little more than that, but his mom is still alive. And it has never been remedied. Yeah, I think with relationships, I've said this before. When you avoid a hard conversation, you are taking on a debt, and that debt has to be repaid with interest in the future. Time doesn't heal anything when it comes to relationships. It just makes things worse. So, unless you're willing to make those minor repairs along the way, have those hard conversations, it's just going to become a major repair later. And I think that rule of thumb applies directly to what happened here, which is, falling out happened. Falling outs happen in families. That's, needs to be remedied through a hard conversation. That didn't happen for a variety of reasons. I think it was mostly his father was stubborn, viewed it, I think, through a lens of power, of like his son, his golden son. My dad was like very much the oldest, like the son who was going to achieve the things. And so him stepping out from, behind the shadow of the father, like I think there was a lot of almost like biological power dynamic thing that happened under the surface, if I had to guess. And look, that water under the bridge just continued to build and build and build and build. And that debt, the interest, like it just kept ballooning, ballooning, ballooning. And at some point, it just becomes too much. And so I think it becomes very difficult. Like for my dad's mother, who my dad views as a great mother. Like my dad, would probably have choice words to say about his father, as a person and the type of father that he might have been. But his mother was a very loving, kind woman. And so for the fact that relationship hasn't been remedied, I really think at some point it's too much water under the bridge. And for both sides, it just becomes really challenging. So I think if it were to get remedied, it would have to be driven by my sister or myself. We would have to tell my parents that we wanted to do something.
Yeah, man, it's so fascinating because you're talking about people that I obviously don't know, but it makes me feel sad. Like I think family is so important, and there's something that strikes me about it which just feels so kind of immature and pointless, right? Like I know that people have falling outs, but people get older and they die. You know, I'm from a very big family, not just my immediate family, which is big, but my extended family is gigantic. My dad is one of 11. My mom was one of seven. I have over 50 first cousins. I'm one of five. Like I'm, you know, got 10 nieces and nephews. I'm just from a giant family. And something that, no, there's a lot of amazing things about being from a big family. And I love the dynamic. One thing about it, though, which no one ever talks about, is you witness a lot of death. So, being from such a huge family, I've had dozens of family members in the past, 15, 20 years, had dozens of people pass away. You know, almost every year someone passes away, right? People just get old. You get to the stage where people are in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s. And so it hits me very hard because I'm just super aware of mortality. And you think that, look, people aren't going to be around forever. So, outside of sort of the most extreme circumstances. I think having those type of sort of permanent fallouts with your family, those are things which people will grow to regret it because those people aren't always going to be there. People get sick, people get old, people pass away, and I think that happening and there just being this wedge or this grudge or being, oh, that person's gone and I didn't talk to them for 15 years because of something relatively frivolous. It just makes me feel sad when I kind of hear those stories. There's people I know personally. It might be their brother, it might be their parent, it might be their son, daughter, whatever the case may be. And in 99% of cases, it's not something that's insurmountable. It's just like a small thing, and the ego gets in the way, and the stubbornness gets in the way, and everyone wants the other person to be the bigger person. And I don't know, it just makes me feel sad. So I do hope it gets reconciled.
I completely agree with that. I do think it is very sad, and I think it's really sad for my mom in a lot of ways because I think she has carried a lot of grief associated with it for feeling like she was the catalyst to that falling out and unnecessary grief, right? I do feel like it was a burden. I know my parents have worked on that over the years, and they have an unbelievably loving, supportive marriage. 42 plus years, they've been like a beacon of what it means to have an amazing relationship and marriage for my wife and I, for my sister and her husband, and we're very grateful for that. And so I think that oftentimes, I think it was my grandmother who once told me, "Never fear sadness, as it tends to sit right next to love." And I always remember reflecting on that idea of the fact that some of the most beautiful things in life sort of dance on this razor's edge with the most painful. And you can't have the beauty without the beast in a lot of areas in life. And so when I reflect on it in the context of this specific scenario with my family as well, I don't know that my father would have been the same person if not for that extraordinary sadness of that event. I don't know whether he would have been as crazy, loving, uh, obsessively supportive as I feel like he was, if not for that event. And so, to me, there is through all of these moments of sadness, also that that true silver lining, like that feeling of the beauty that you got on the other side of it. And when I have this model that I think about with relationships that the two pillars of strong relationships are high expectations and high support. High expectations are I have high expectations for what you should accomplish, for the type of things that you should be doing, for the things that you are capable of. But paired with high support, meaning I am willing to lift you up and support you to go and achieve those high expectations that I have for you. High expectations in the absence of high support breed resentment. We all have relationships that we've had like that, where the person has had these crazy high expectations for us, but then been totally absent when it comes to meeting them. But the two together create this incredible, beautiful thing. And I really felt like I had that with my parents. And to be honest, I really do credit a part of that for this trauma that they experienced. And so it's always hard to have regrets around these things in life because every single bad thing that happened to you, all of those wounds that you experienced contribute to the person that you are and to the way that you show yourself in the world. And if the way that you show yourself in the world is truly beautiful, it's hard to then look back and say, "Oh, this trauma, I wish it hadn't happened."
I hear that. As a husband and father now, what do you think is the biggest lesson you learned from that thing that your parents went through?
I think there's a few things. Number 1, never avoid hard conversations. Never, never, never avoid hard conversations. I can tweet that until I will die on that hill. Like, every single thing that you want in life is on the other side of something that you don't wanna do, but you need to do it. And that could be the hard conversation, that could be the workout, that could be the hours of focused work, whatever it is, all of those things that you want. All of the most meaningful things in life are the result of delayed gratification. And when relationships are the focus, delayed gratification is all about doing that hard thing now. It's about having that hard conversation now to avoid the struggle later. And so when I think about, like, with my son and the lessons that I want him to learn, sort of brings me to the second piece here, which is you can't actually teach your kids anything. You just have to embody the things that you want them to learn. I feel like everything that I am as a human being came from seeing the way that my parents interacted with one another and how they interacted with the world, how they loved each other, how my dad treated my mom like a queen, how they would fight, but then I always saw them make up and the repair that came after it. I always saw my dad working hard on things that he cared about, explaining to me why he was working hard on those things, why he cared about those things, why he was traveling and might not be around at certain times. And those lessons to me, like, they couldn't have been taught. They are unteachable lessons. I needed to actually observe them and see them. And so when I think about my son now, who's 2.5, he's seeing me going through life and he's picking up everything. The way that, like, if I want my son to treat my wife like a queen, I better damn well treat my wife like a queen. If I want my son to understand the value of delayed gratification, he better see me working hard on things and delaying gratification. That is how our kids, that is how we mold them to be the type of person that we want them to be. Every single, you know, challenge that we take on in our own life becomes our son's affirmation of tomorrow. It's the thing that they look in the mirror and say to themselves that they want to do just by observing us doing it in the today.
There's a lot here. So we got deep real quick. I want to learn a little bit more about your story. So we started out with your family background, and you were talking about getting into Stanford, playing baseball, being a pitcher. And how did you get into the world of investment? Did you go straight into that after Stanford, or was there something you did in between?
Now, I went straight into that, and I was pretty lucky in the sense that I happened to meet and get connected with this group that was just getting started. Had had just kind of formed this new firm, and they were in, which was very unique, hiring at the analyst level, which was straight out of school. Usually, those places will hire. Out of an investment bank or out of a consulting firm after 2 years. And so the standard model is you go do 2 years at one of those places, McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or whatever it is. Then you go join an investment fund. And I was able to sort of skip that as a result of this one firm that happened to be in the area. Um, I got started in 2014. I started working there. And I mean, my mental model for life at the time was like, if I go make a lot of money, I'm going to be really happy. That was kind of how I thought about the world. I had grown up. My dad's a professor, so we never wanted for anything. We certainly weren't rich. I had a lot of friends in my town whose parents were in finance or hedge funds or whatever it was, and they were really rich. They had private jets. They would, had a bunch of houses, all these different things. And I always remember growing up being like, "Oh man, that must be great." And I sort of ignored the fact that a lot of their parents were divorced. I ignored the fact that a lot of those friends like ate dinner by themselves every night. That they had like 20 nannies, that they didn't like, spend a lot of time with their parents. I kind of ignored all those things and just focused on like, oh, they had these great, all the toys, all the best coaches, all the best equipment, whatever it was. And so when I started working, my idea was like, let me go find the path that leads to that. That like making a whole bunch of money, and that's the path I should walk down.
And then what?
I did that. Yes, I spent the first 7 years of my career basically steadily marching down that path
Mhm.
to what I thought was the good life. And for the first 5 or so of that, I would say things generally lined up. I mean, I was learning a ton. I was working with a great group of people. The world of, working in finance, you work a ton, and that's part of it. You're learning a lot and you're getting paid well for it. Your hourly rate probably sucks because you're working 80 to 100 hours a week. But you're making, you have a good salary and bonus and you're making a bunch of money. And I was working with a great group of people, like I said, so that it was quite fun. Unfortunately, like as I got kind of past that 5-year mark, I started to notice that my own sort of like narrow, myopic focus on money as the only thing that I needed to think about in my life started to uh, manifest as a lot of other areas of my life uh, showing cracks. I had been living 3,000 miles away from my parents for, at that point, it had been 9 or 10 years. I was seeing them at most like once a year at that point. My relationship with my sister, I mentioned earlier, had sort of ground to a halt. Um, I was like not very present with friends. I was hiding a lot of mental health struggles from the world, sort of bottling that up. My wife and I were trying to conceive at the time and really struggling, and I was not there for her in the way that I needed to be during that struggle. It's kind of something that is a topic, infertility and struggles to conceive, that I think a lot of people don't talk about, and it is stigmatized, and it's a topic that especially men uh, never talk about. People suffer with it in silence, and it becomes this, anyone out there that's listening that's experienced this, it becomes this monthly thing of like, you get your hopes up and then it doesn't work out, and there's this enormous letdown and blame and grief, and you know all of these negative emotions every single month, and you're kind of going through that for a period of time. And not being able to be present during that period because I was so focused on this one thing and not showing up in the way that I needed to for the people around me that I loved. um, that really started to create cracks in my life, in a way, as we came into COVID and as sort of 2020, 2021 got started. I was just hiding so much from the world at that point that it started to become clear to me that I was kind of from the outside looking in, winning the game. But I started to think that if that was what winning felt like, that I had to be playing the wrong game.
Let's talk about the hard conversation. Let's talk about this infertility situation, because this is something, as you've said, many couples struggle with now. I think it's something like 30 to 40% of couples now are struggling with this. And as you said, it is not something people publicly want to discuss a lot. And I guess I understand why, but at the same time, as you said, we need to have difficult conversations, because I always say that you can't diagnose something properly, let alone solve it, unless you can talk about it. This is one of the reasons I despise political correctness and certain forms of topical taboos, where it's like, oh no, you can't talk about that. You can't mention that. It's like, well, this is clearly an issue. If something's a problem for millions of people and we can't kind of just open up the conversation and say, hey, what's going on here, then how is that going to make it better in the long term? Um, when did you get married, actually? I'm curious.
So my wife and I got married in 2016,
Okay.
December, but we had been together since uh, 2007.
Okay.
I was 15 years old. She was 14 when we met. We were in high school, and we dated actually the entire way through. So we had really grown up together, in a lot of ways, and sort of navigated all these big seasons of change in our lives. We did long distance for 7 years actually during that stretch too. While I
Hmm.
was out playing baseball on the West Coast, she was at school in New York.
That's awesome, man. Well, obviously you've overcome that hurdle. I know you have a 2.5-year-old son, as you've mentioned, so that is awesome. Tell me what that was like after going through that challenge and those low points. I mean, just talk me through that. What was that like?
So it's really it's almost indescribable. So all of those challenges that I was having came to a head in May of 2021. We were living in California. I had a single conversation with this old friend, who pointed out quite poignantly that um, if we didn't make a change, I was going to see my parents 15 more times before they died. And I told him and opened up that it was a struggle for me being so far away from my parents who were getting older, who were starting to, for the first time, show chinks in the armor, if you will. I was starting to notice they were slowing down. And I think COVID did that to a lot of people, just those years, some of the social isolation and the impact that has on your health. And he pointed that out to me. And the next day, I went home and I told my wife that I thought we needed to make a change. We had been in this 2 year struggle with infertility. Um, Clearly, my priorities had fallen out of whack. We were living 3,000 miles away from both sets of our parents. A lot of our friends had moved out of the area. There were so many reasons. There were so many things that were just screaming. And so within 45 days, we had sold our house in California. I had left my full time position at my job, and we had moved 3,000 miles to the East Coast to live closer to both sets of parents. And the single most beautiful thing that happened in all of this was within 2 weeks of getting into our new place on the East Coast, my wife got pregnant. And I still, excuse me,
It's all good, man.
I still think about this because I am not a particularly religious person, but it was one of those moments in life when you just feel like God winked at you. That when things fall into alignment, your entire life falls into place as it should, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And that was the greatest blessing I could imagine. Um, and that's really been our center, like our anchor, our true north, if you will, that has held us over these last several years as we've continued to grow now a family out here, as we've navigated, various health struggles that our parents have encountered, family, friends, and as we've built this new life together. Um, but just such a blessing.
That's beautiful, man. I love to hear that. And how has fatherhood been thus far? You're a couple years in.
Yeah, I think it's the most incredible thing in the world. I have I will fight to the death on this whole narrative on Twitter that seems to be popping off all the time about traditional societal norms of marriage and having kids and how it's there's this whole thing of like you shouldn't get married and people I don't know. I've seen all these things. I try not to get into the fray on some of this stuff, but I'm always just like, you are missing out on one of the most beautiful things in the world, man. Look, you're talking to a guy who spent the first 30 years of his life convinced that kids were a distraction and that,
Mm,
it was going to get in the way of the thing that actually mattered, which was making money. And the day my son was born, I was in the hospital and I held him for the first time, and I'm standing there holding him, and he's looking up at me and I'm like, I spent the first 30 years of my life wondering what the meaning and purpose of all of this was. Oh, this whole life, what it was. And then I'm standing there and it's looking right back at me. And I feel like there's no greater clarity and focus than that which you get from your children. I
mm,
mean, people always talk about young people talk about like, oh, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know how to find it. When you have a kid, it's like at the end of the day, you have a higher order purpose. It's like I need to protect that freaking child. I need to provide for that child. I need to, you know, teach them. I need to create a world for them. I need to prepare them for the scary parts of the world that are out in front. And I can't imagine something that provides more clarity and focus than that. And on top of that, it's just fun.
mm,
I've had a lot of fun in my life. Don't get me wrong. I've done all the fun things. I've done the vacations. I've done the, whatever, like all the stuff that people fly. I've flown on nice jets. I've done all that stuff that people flex on Instagram or want to post on all the places and say how great their life is. I've done that. It's fleeting. It is
mhm,
fickle. It only lasts for a second and then you just start feeling empty with a child in your life, it's such a struggle and there's so many challenging aspects of it. But gosh, if it isn't just rewarding and so much joy and love and seeing them learn and laugh and experience things for the first time, and the wonder with which they approach life makes you want to approach life with more wonder. I mean, when my son and I last night, he's into dinosaurs right now for the first time.
Oh
I love
yes.
dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs when I was a kid. And so I'm like, I turn on that prehistoric planet show on Apple TV that has the like crazy dinosaur, like real animation thing. And I turn it on, and he's the whole time just like, wow, like making all these noises. And I can't help but live my life more that way. And we kind of all need a little bit more of that infused into our lives. And a kid forces that into your world. So I also, look, I think part of it is because of the struggle that led up to us having him, the amount of gratitude that we both have for him in our life is like enhanced. There's a lot of gratitude for the joy that he brings into our life as a result of what preceded it.
Man, we thank God. I love to hear that testimony. Children are wonderful, man. I'm a I'm an uncle times 10. I've got five nieces and five nephews. I'm a future future father. I'm very much looking forward to that stage. I've seen all four of my I'm the youngest of five, so I've seen all my older siblings go through that, and vast majority of my friends are parents now. And so many things you say there are interesting because I often just think about the fact that, like, as modern human beings, we keep having to like relearn things that were known thousands of years ago, right? So it seems that you can read writings from almost any era. You can go back thousands of years ago. You can go back, read the Bible, read stuff written even before it, and there's just kind of this cycle, right? There's so many warnings in the Bible about chasing material wealth, and not life is not all about money. And hey, first commandment is actually go out, be fruitful, and multiply, have children. And as modern people, it's kind of in our nature, and maybe in this era of science and studies and whatever, and everyone wants to kind of reinvent the wheel over and over and over, like all these debates you said, right? Is marriage good? Is having children good? Whatever. It's like we're all the result of an unbroken chain of people for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years, thankfully reproducing. So even when I look, of course, whether or not someone wants to have kids, that's totally on them. But to sort of like question it as a general function of importance, there's C.S. Lewis has this wonderful term he calls chronological snobbery, which is this idea that people in any era assume they're much wiser than all the people who came before them. So it doesn't matter if you're in the 1800s, 1700s, whatever. 2025 people are like, oh no, we're so much smarter than all of those ancestors. We can throw away all these old traditions, and who needs all this stuff. And then you get a little bit older and wiser and have certain experiences, and you're like, yeah, they were right about pretty much everything. Yeah, they got some big stuff wrong, of course, but yeah, they worked this stuff out a while ago. So maybe we should not be so quick to throw it all away. And I mean, we're literally at the stage now where many countries are going to be facing like an actual population crisis because these ideas have gone that far, and that's a whole other conversation. But I just think it's fascinating how sometimes we have to live life and sometimes chase after the wrong things, and touch the hot stove to realize, oh, actually that's hot, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And but here we are now, and we can share our experiences on podcasts.
Yeah, you just hope you don't get burned so bad by the stove that you can't, live your life normally, right? Like I often think there's sort of a Goldilocks level to the failure that you experience, right? Like in my own journey, I marched down the path pretty far, and I sort of feel like I like towed the line of going past the edge where I would have broken relationships, or where I would have lost a parent, or my sister in my relationship was unable to remedy, or something would have happened, but I didn't quite get there. I pivoted off the path and walked down this new one where I was able to build a life of wealth across all of these areas. I kind of like touched the stove. I like reached out to the stove. It was really warm, and then I pulled my hand back and ran away from it. And that's it feels a little bit like that's the key. And part of me thinks, and the reason I wrote this book actually is I want to be able to sort of share the warning sign and give people the new path and the clarity on it, so that you can learn by like sort of being near and immersing yourself in the ideas of the stove rather than actually needing to go and put your face on it. And that should work. Like, we are smart, we are humans. I don't need to go put my finger into the electrical socket over there to know that it's not good. Like, I've been told that that's probably a bad idea, so I'm going to just avoid it. I'm not going to do it. So we should be able to do that as humans. I actually have faith in our ability to do that. But the piece that's missing, which is what the book really tries to get at, is okay, if I know the stove is really hot and it's bad for me, what's the better path? Like, what's the better path? What's the non-stove path? And how do I build my life in that direction on the slightly different one? If the current scoreboard of how you measure your life is broken, what is the better version? What is the better scoreboard? What is the right one? And that's my life's mission, man. That is what I want to spread in the world and what I want to put out there.
Yeah, I love that. We live in such an interesting time because, in many ways, modern men and women, we have more options than ever before. We have so many more options than our ancestors in every sense of the word, right? Just in terms of deciding what we're going to do with our lives and every aspect of it, from the work we do to the friends we make to where we live to where we travel or don't, to who we marry or don't marry, whether we procreate or we don't. In the past, for most of human history, so many things were just, they weren't even options. It's just like, hey, you're born in this place, you're going to stay in this place, you're going to die in this place, you're going to marry one of these handful of people, you're going to have kids, you're going to do this. And I think in a modern lens, we like to look back at all this as, limitation and oppression and this and this. And sure, that has existed and it still exists in pockets of the world. But as I kind of get older, I sort of question what the right amount of optionality is, almost, right? Like, you don't having just more options isn't an inherently good thing. I think we pretend it is, but it's not. Like, we need some limitations. And actually, anyone to even become successful in any dimension, as you know, you have to put limitations on yourself. Like, that's what discipline even is. If you just eat whatever the heck you want, which we now have the option to do, which our ancestors didn't, if you just do the activities or don't do the activities that you want or you don't want, if you just live this life of whether it's hedonism or it's nihilism or whatever, it actually results in what so many people do talk about: mental health issues, depression, anxiety. Why is everyone depressed? Why is all this? And it's like, it's some of it is a function of so many options, I believe, that people quite literally don't even know what to do. It's just like, well, I can do anything and everything, but none of it seems to be kind of making people happy, even if they play that game for a while. And there's some people who, really play that game unshackled, and yeah, it doesn't result in joy.
This is an interesting thought experiment that you're bringing up. Um, So, I mean, scientifically, this is true. The paradox of choice is this idea that more choices we would think would make you happier, but it actually reduces consumer happiness. It actually makes you less happy when you have more choices. You feel less satisfied with whatever choice you take. So, if you put two choices in front of a person and they take one, they're more satisfied than if you put 50 choices and they pick one. Even though you would think more choices leads to more happiness, it doesn't. It's an interesting thing to ask the question, sort of applied through your lens, whether social media in an age where we are connected to the entire world, where we feel like the entire world is our option set, has reduced happiness in the context of partner, spousal, marital choices. I saw something the other day on Twitter that was talking about how a good-looking girl from Kansas. Can go on Instagram, share some pictures of herself, and get flown out to St. Bart's by some extraordinarily wealthy millionaire, end up marrying that guy, and go live her life. Previously, she would have married the guy down the street at the farm in Kansas. And so the post was talking about how the guy down the street in Kansas is cooked because now the competition set is this global context for attractive women. And taking out the actual context of that post, there's an interesting thought experiment that exists within that, which is exactly what you're saying. like, is our happiness as an aggregate reduced by the fact that social media has taken the option set from the people in your immediate vicinity that you might potentially meet through an actual organic interaction running into them somewhere, all the way to this global scale of anyone that you can slide into the DMs of?
Yeah, there's definitely some type of sweet spot, and I would imagine that the sweet spot for each sector and even each individual is different. The optimal number of choices probably isn't two,
Mm.
but it's probably also not 8 billion.
Although the flip side of this, by the way, I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
I know a lot of arranged marriages who have built incredible partnership marriages.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm
so
pro.
you like,
I'm pro arranged marriage. It's one of my controversial takes.
oh, that's interesting. Oh, we should
Yeah.
talk about this because, like,
Okay.
Indian culture, arranged marriage is still very much a thing. Um, all of the arranged marriages that I've known in my immediate family have led to what seem okay. Obviously, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but seemingly on the surface, loving, very supportive relationships where they've raised um, really well-adjusted children who have gone out into the world and done great things.
Mhm.
Um, and so,
And India's
yeah,
divorce rate is like 1/30th of the USA's.
interesting.
It's like under 1%. It's like 1%, right?
Yeah, you don't know how much of divorce is sort of a cultural thing because there is, yeah, like there are statistics on if your parents were divorced, your likelihood of getting divorced is astronomically higher than if not. So you wonder whether there's like a an acceptance of the idea of divorce culturally in America versus India. But I do think that, like, this whole concept of the paradox of choice, I've never really thought about it in the context of finding a partner, but um, if you need to make it work with someone, we find ways to make it work. If you find a way to, like, crawl through the mud and find your way to the other side on certain things when you need to. If you know that you can just press the eject button immediately, you like don't you kind of don't start to vibe in the first second of something, you just press the eject button. It's very hard to build the long lasting, meaningful relationships if you press eject at the first sign of any sort of struggle. That's sort of the equivalent of, like, going to the gym and at the first sign of, like, muscle strain, you just sort of are like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to walk on the treadmill, right? Like, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress in the muscle building. Same thing as a work. Like, if you, the first sign of struggle, you just quit at the thing, you're probably not going to build the business. And so I wonder whether that same rule kind of applies to relationships where um, it is this cultural propensity to press the eject button too quickly that is leading to less happiness in our marital choices.
Yeah, I think so. And that loops back into why so many people of our generation and younger are do have question marks around marriage and all that, because a lot of it is from that whole culture and the legal system around it of just like, oh boy, well, if so many people are almost just sort of treating it as extended dating, let's say, with sort of extra steps, then there's people who are worried about getting into it. I wanted to kind of go into the arranged marriage thing a little more, because I want to say, like, this is firstly, I want to say I'm pro arranged marriage. I'm anti coercion, right? So I'm not
Mm.
saying like people who don't want to be together should be forced kicking and screaming together or anything like that. As I've just lived my 38 years of life and the experiences with it, and I look at things now and I look at things around the world. um Firstly, and this is going to upset some people, but I just think it's objectively true. um in most cases, parents make better decisions. They make better decisions than their children do. They have more wisdom, especially when we're talking about something like love and relationships. Let's be real. Billions of people make bad choices all of the time, often because they're young and they're horny and they're being driven by hormones and this and this and this, right? But when you actually think of a marriage and the stability that I believe a marriage is supposed to have, and the unison not just of two individuals, but actually bringing two different families or tribes together, let's say, then yeah, parents have a lot of insight and wisdom where, like, if they're gonna make a suggestion, right? If they're already doing the vetting, right? They're not just there like, how are people meeting now? They're literally swiping through apps like it's a catalog, just looking at seeing what people look like and a
Yeah.
couple of basic stats about them, and people are making decisions based off of that. Whereas in the past, or even in certain parts of the world, it's like, okay, we know this family, we know their values, they share certain things in culture, religion, whatever. Can that be too restrained? Yes, of course it can be too restrained, right? Which is again why I want to make it clear I'm very anti-coercion. I'm not saying people shouldn't have freedom of choice, but I'm essentially talking about like matchmaking in the same way that if you had a good friend, maybe even an older friend who knows you very well, knows your values, knows all that, if they were to, set you up as a single person with someone, the probability that that is going to work out is going to be much higher than flicking through a random app and just going, oh, she looks hot. She looks hot. It's like, no, I already know she has all these certain characters. This is her background. This is like, you guys are already aligned. So yeah, like I think it's interesting that people kind of freak out at the concept of arranged marriage, but not the concept of matchmaking. Because when I say it, I really kind of just mean matchmaking.
Yeah, there's a few things that I want to peel back at. I'd say I broadly agree with you on this point. Really, for a couple reasons. I mean, first off, while you were talking, I was looking up a couple stats. Over 50% of marriages in the world are still arranged. In the most recent thing that I could find, which is just crazy to think about. Living in the United States, you're like, you can't imagine that a lot of the world still operates this way. I think one of the things that you are solving for. Um, uh, in building a great relationship, you have to prioritize growing in love over falling in love. That has gotten lost in the social media age. Social media has convinced you that falling is the important piece. It's the Instagram moments, it's the perfect filtered photos, it's the like glamorous, glitzy things. That is not what a great relationship is built on. A great relationship is built on crawling through the mud with someone. It's through the struggle, it's through the moments of doing nothing. The moments where you're in your pajamas, you're not dressed up, you're not on a fancy date, you're not on a honeymoon. That's the growing, not the falling. But if you are convinced at the outset that the falling is what matters, and you lose sight of the fact that real relationships are built through the growing, you are going to be sorely disappointed. You are actually setting yourself up for failure at the outset. And so I think one of the reasons, one of the things you're getting at when it comes to arranged marriage is that by default, an arranged marriage is focused on the growing because you're taking the falling out of the equation, right? You're putting the two people together. You're saying, okay, you two are going to get married, you're paired. And then your entire focus is on the growing. There's not really like, you're sort of removing the whole like falling phase because it's connected. And now you can just focus on building a partnership with this person. There's also by default a long-term orientation. When we think about relationships, actually this applies not just to romantic relationships, to normal partnerships, to friendships, to business relationships, whatever. People are very short term in the way that they think. Uh, Everyone uses the word networking. Oh, I want to network. That implies that there's a transaction, right? I'm like, oh, Zuby, I want to network with you, right? That's like me basically coming with my hand out, asking you for something. Hey, I want to get something from you. A real relationship, you take the lens, okay, I'm going to know this person for 50 years. How would I operate? If I'm going
Mhm.
to know this person for 50 years, there's no way in heck that I'm coming in and asking for something at the outset. There's no way I'm making it transactional because I'm going to be with this person. So I'm going to give with no expectation of return. I'm going to help solve problems along the way. I'm going to have hard conversations. I'm going to do the things that are building it for the long term. And I think that one of the things that you were getting at when you're talking about the merits of an arranged marriage is that it forces a long term orientation in both parties at the outset of it. So it's interesting. I've never thought about arranged marriages at this length. Um,
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I've seen them really work in people that I've been around on the Indian side of my family. But it's interesting to just think about one of the things that they're sort of getting at.
Yeah. It's not the direction I thought the podcast would go in, but I think it's I think it's a genuinely interesting topic. I think that Westerners in particular, and we're all Westerners to an extent. Um, I think when people hear the word arranged, they think forced. Like
Yeah, it's
they
actually a
lump
bad
them.
term.
Yeah,
It's a
they
bad
lump
term.
them together because I'm very against, like I said, I'm against coercion, I'm against force. Um, when I say arrange, yeah, you could just call it like matchmaking from the side of the families, essentially. And it's you said something interesting there because so many, sadly, so many couples when they break up or even marriages when they split apart, you hear that term all the time, which is a uniquely modern Western term, which is we fell out of love or we grew apart, which I think actually hits right at the core kind of what you're saying of the falling in love versus growing in love, right? Because if it's just an infatuation thing of, oh my gosh, this person is so hot and I want to be around them all the time. Look, whether someone looks at this from a spiritual perspective or a scientific perspective, that super hot butterfly feeling, like that's not a, you're not going to sustain a 50-year relationship off of that. And again, I think our ancestors were wise enough to know this. So it was more like, okay, cool. Like there's nothing wrong with love and you should certainly be attracted. But if you think like it's going to be that fiery thing like the entire time, you are completely setting yourself up for disappointment. And as soon as you no longer are feeling that, then I think that's when people do the, oh, we just grew apart or we just fell out of love. Like there's nothing fundamentally wrong. They're kind of just going through a normal process. And I think this is why you have some people, they'll do this one, two, three, four, three, four, five times, and the same thing keeps happening over and over. And it's not even that something's fundamentally wrong. It's just like the expectations are not rooted in reality of how relationships actually work and develop. I
Yeah.
say all this, by the way. I'm not an expert. Like I've never been married, so I'm just I'm just
No, I
speaking
think,
from a
but
common sense
I
perspective.
don't think either of us is saying we're experts. I do think what we're weighing in on is sort of just what the sort of underlying principle is of the practice. I do think the more I think about it, the term arranged marriage is actually like it's not a great term. It's not really what we're kind of talking about in some sense. And I think it is like it is an important distinction that you make. Obviously, no one is pro coercion. You know, we believe in free will and liberty. Um, but I do think you're right. Like the obsession with physical attraction is also just dangerous. It's sort of the exact same thing, but in the dating world of what I was talking about being narrowly focused on money. When you focus on the one thing, you can lose sight of the bigger thing very easily. And physical attraction as the sole exclusive focus, which is what happens when you're doing the like swipe left, swipe right game to a lot of people, not to everybody, is not conducive to building a long-term relationship. Physical attraction cannot be the foundation of the house that your relationship is. It has to be something deeper than that because physical attraction fades, right? Like you are not always going to be hot as a guy or as a girl. You're eventually going to get old. You're going to be wrinkly. You know, you're not going to be like the stunner that you might be now. And if that is the foundation of your entire relationship, um, that is really going to be painful at some point in one direction or in both. Um, it can be a part of it, and I actually would argue it should be a part of it. I think it's a great thing to be physically attracted to somebody. I'm extraordinarily physically attracted to my wife, but it is not the sole foundation of our relationship, nor was it ever that. You have to have, spiritual attraction, energetic attraction, intellectual attraction, emotional attraction. All of those things contribute to that foundation of having a solid house. And so I actually think that matchmaking services, when I think they work well, are probably working well because they are focusing on things that go beyond just the physical. They're probably taking into account the physical in an ideal sense, but there's also all of these other things that we know make someone attractive to us. And you're capturing that, which you just by definition cannot do in a snapshot of a single picture of a person that you're deciding on, in an instant.
And last point on this as well is I think what's so interesting about it as well is I think both from the male perspective and from the female perspective, the in the immediate thing that can make like somebody, I don't know, super hot, let's say, like immediately hot, and that kind of like tingly butterfly feeling that someone might get, like that can actually be like a bit of a warning sign because both as a man who's attracted to a woman or vice versa, there can be sort of qualities or traits which kind of biologically may turn someone on, like kind of switch someone on, but it's not really it's not necessarily aligned with what would make for a long-term sustainable situation, right? You have the sort of women being attracted to the sort of the bad boy, the sort of bad boy dynamic, and then you might have guys who like, oh, like hot. There's almost a more sort of, for lack of a better term, pornographic kind of look where a guy might be like, oh, like that's kind of hot, but it's like, uh, maybe that's not really the right type of person you want to be going for. Um,
Porn
anyway,
is
moving on.
another whole
Oh
beast.
boy,
Yeah, I mean, that's
that's a
our
whole
other
rabbit
rabbit hole.
hole, and
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all these things are we've got a lot of things that we're dealing with in our generation that are just like cooking people's brains and attention spans.
Yeah, I mean, technology is very much been a double-edged sword for society. It has given us incredible amount of opportunity and richness to our lives, and reduced friction in a number of ways that are really helpful in evening the opportunity playing field, education access, so many ways.
Mm.
But there are some very, very dark underbellies to it that exist, and I think in the world of AI, get much, much darker in a very, very scary way in some of the years to come.
Does that concern you as a father of a young son?
Enormously,
Yeah.
enormously. It would concern me more if I had a young daughter. And so if we have a second child and and she's a girl, uh, it will concern me more. But I am very fearful about some of the things that are happening with the progress on these technologies, and our inability to get alignment and have people out in front being proactive about some of the challenges that they are going to create. Uh, I think humans are very, very good at like running full speed at something, and very, very bad at sort of thinking about. It, I forget when this was. It might have been during COVID. Someone tweeted something to the effect of like humans are very bad at understanding exponential growth curves, and by definition, you have to act when it feels absurdly early to act, because otherwise it's going to be too late just because of how the curve will work. And I think AI is sort of like that with some of these darker sides of it, where if you don't set up the really thoughtful approach to how this is going to be managed, to how we're going to restrain some of these things that could be really dark for humanity, you kind of already have it's too late. You know, you're not going to be able to walk it back, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle with a lot of these things. We're already seeing it. I mean, there are like these terrifying stories now of, you know, like revenge porn. You know, someone breaks up with another person, they take a picture of their ex, and you can upload it to some AI thing, and it makes a bunch of pornography of the person. And they're uploading it to these sites. I mean, it's like uh, it's horrific. It's horrific when you think about and play out the sort of second, third, nth order effects of these things into the future. And that's in my, you know, immediate 5 year window. So then when I think about the 25-year window of my children's life, it really scares me if we don't act immediately and do things. I am optimistic in one sense, which is that, you know, Donald Trump has put in place this you know, team, at least, you know, with some people that I know to be thoughtful. Whether or not you agree with their politics is a separate thing. I know they're thoughtful, intelligent people, and David Sachs and sort of the team around that, Sri Ram Krishnan and a few others, intelligent, thoughtful people. Whether or not you agree with them, I don't really care. You want thoughtful people, at least in these positions, and yeah, that is very scary, though, I think, for the next generation.
Yeah, it terrifies me, and I'm a natural optimist, and I'm not I'm very far from a doomer. But like you said, when I think of second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences of some of this stuff, and I just think in my own lifetime, you're how old are you, Sahil?
I'm 34.
34. Okay, so I'm 4 years older than you. I'm 38, and I just think of where tech was like, say, in the early 90s or mid 90s, right? So when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I think of the technology we were dealing with, and then I look at what we have now, and that leap is insane. So when I think of, okay, 25 years from now, what are we going to be dealing with? When you're thinking AI, robotics, like if you just think of what we have now as being essentially primitive, right? Because some people are just like, oh well, with AI, you can still see the difference. I know the hands are a little bit funny. I'm like, you don't think they're going to fix that?
Yeah, when people
I'm like,
say things like that, they're like, "Oh, it's still really bad." I'm like, "Dude, but that it literally didn't exist a year and a half ago. What do you mean?"
yeah, it's gonna go. I don't know. I mean, I think that this is where it kind of gets somewhat religious for me because I think it's like my faith in God and the extension of that of like my faith in the human spirit that gives me some sort of optimism about these various technologies coming down the pipeline. Like I always believe that the sort of spirit of good is going to ultimately win, no matter how dark and evil it may get, that the long term story of humanity is one of triumph. right? We go through super dark periods, super weird things. Like I imagine if we existed in 1925 or 1940, right, and we're living in the world, we'd be like, oh my gosh, like this is definitely the end of humanity. And then you come out of it, right? You come out of the fascist regime, you come out of the communist regime, you come out of whatever horrible thing happens, and you're back on the upswing. So I think there will be these periods of darkness. We're just coming to the end of the first quarter of a new century. So I have no idea what's coming in 2050, 2075, 2095. I don't know what's coming, but I think on a long enough time frame, we're going to be okay.
Have you heard of the Fermi Paradox?
I have, but I wouldn't be able to explain it.
So this is the idea of it's about like life in the universe, and it's basically the question of are we alone in the universe? And basically, the Fermi paradox is saying if the universe is so extraordinarily abundant, which it is, like trillions upon trillions, like more stars than you can possibly imagine, more sun-like stars than you can imagine, more Earth-like planets than you can imagine. Extraordinary numbers. Where is everybody? And it's basically asking the question of like, if there are so many things out there, and there have to be, pieces of life out there, why haven't we been contacted by one of them, by some like intergalactic, civilization that is much more advanced than us? Why haven't we heard from them? Where is everybody? And one of the theories about why is that there is something that is called, I believe it's called the Great Filter, which is basically this idea that there is kind of like a wall at which most intelligent life civilizations reach and then get killed, completely wiped out at this one sort of like moment. And so the actual number of civilizations that are able to surpass that is effectively none. There might be, a couple, but it's so small that it's actually possible that we wouldn't have heard from them in the vastness of the galaxy. Uh, and the first time I read that and understood that, it was in a piece from Tim Urban, one of my favorite writers. He writes the Wait But Why blog. And I had like an existential crisis because I literally had this moment. I read it like earlier this year. He wrote it, I think, in 2014 or something. But I had this moment of thinking, like, oh my God, is AI and the development of this stuff the great filter? Like, is this the moment where uh, we don't think about it early enough? We build a bunch of super intelligence that escapes our confines. We build a bunch of robots that access that super intelligence. And the two things come together and they decide that humans are actually the thing that is holding back the progress of this race and this planet, and they extinguish all of us. Um, I guess maybe you could then argue that like they will be the super intelligent species that exists in the ethos, and so maybe that wouldn't be a great filter. But I had this like big scary moment thinking about that exact thing. Like maybe we're at the great filter, and hopefully it doesn't happen during our lifetimes. But maybe as a broad thing, this curve of technological development that we are on is sort of actually us contributing to our own demise.
Yep. I've said before that human beings are the only species both stupid and smart enough to engineer our own extinction.
That's kind of a good way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. By the way, like my hottest take prediction is that I think there is a like significant non-zero chance of humanoid robots turning against us during our lifetimes.
Oh yeah. I'll tell you
I'm
what's
like,
going to
I've seen too
happen.
many movies about this exact thing. I'm
Yeah.
like, I just
I'll tell you what. Within 15 years, Sahil, there's going to be a mainstream robot lives matter movement.
a mainstream robot lives matter
There's going to be a
within 15
big
years.
Yeah, there's going to be a big conversation and debate, and it'll get into politics of what the rights of robots and AI and so on should be, because it's going to get so. Because right now, when I say robots, people imagine like a
Yeah.
or like a a tin can, right? But when it gets to the stage where they become, and they will, it will happen when they're going to become virtually indistinguishable from human beings, then it's going to lead to a lot of moral and ethical questions of how they should be treated once people are friends. with they're not going to be called robots. They'll be called, I don't know, synthetics or something. But once they're like friends and companions and they're working for people, and some people are going to be having romantic relationships with them, or can you marry a robot? Who's allowed to turn one on or turn
Mm.
one off? What about self-defense? If someone tries to like attack it, like, does it have a right to self-defense? There's going to be some weird questions. People might think I'm being crazy here, but as you said, people are not thinking exponentially.
The other piece is the ship of Theseus thought experiment as it relates to humans. So the ship of Theseus was this idea of it's like this ancient Greek story. Theseus comes home from this battle and he leaves his ship in Athens, and the people of Athens for 1,000 years maintain his ship because he was this great hero. And so every time a piece sort of rots of the ship, they replace it with a new piece of wood. And eventually, over the course of 1,000 years, every single piece of the ship was individually replaced over that 1,000 years. And so the thought experiment is, after every single piece of the original ship has been replaced with a new one, is the ship that is sitting there still the ship of Theseus? Or is it some new entity? And I kind of asked that same thought experiment question as it relates to humans as we continue to put more and more robot parts into our own bodies. Because you think about technology and healthcare and all the advancements that are going to happen, which will dramatically improve our lives in many ways. But when you think about brain implants, you think about body implants, different things that are going to help us function, help us live longer in all these different ways. At what point are you no longer the human? Do you actually become something else?
Yeah, this is where I become a bit of a luddite, where I'm just like, I'm good staying organic. I'm good staying organic,
I'm
right?
good, like living
Uh,
90 years. Give me a good 90
yeah,
years and I'm out.
yeah. That's my view. If I want to be immortal, that's what reproduction is for, right? We
So you're not
live
on the
on through
don't,
our.
are you on the don't die Brian Johnson train?
No, no, no. I think that's insane. He seems like a very nice guy, but I think he's kind of like an endpoint atheism. Um,
Mm,
I think that's what happens. I think that's almost like the natural endpoint of an atheistic progressive mindset. So largely for my spiritual and religious beliefs, I'm really not on that train, and I think it's both foolhardy and dangerous.
hmm,
Yeah, I'm not. Whenever human beings start to play God past a certain extent, I think that's very, I think that's very dangerous, and I think we've seen that many times throughout history. So I'm not, obviously, I'm not against medicine or surgeries or basic things that can be done to help human beings get towards their natural life expectancy, which is perhaps somewhere between 100 and 120 years. And obviously, a lot of headway has been made with that over the centuries. But the idea of trying to seek immortality, live forever, those type of notions, I'm like, yeah, I don't. Yeah, it would be a big conversation to get into all my opposition to that, but
hmm,
I'm not a fan. And also, I don't think it will work.
hmm,
So it's not just that I don't think it should be done. I also don't think it can be done again unless you're going to actually create a whole new being which is now essentially more robot than it is human.
hmm.
Um yeah, I don't think it's a great one. Sahil, man, we've talked about a bunch of crazy stuff, but I realize we've barely talked about your book. So
We sort of talked about my book, to be
we
honest.
we we
I
we've we've
I mean,
touched on it.
my book is about life, and it is
Yeah.
definitely about love, and it is definitely about building a great life. So we've definitely talked about it in some context.
Okay. Hey, there it is. Awesome. Tell my listeners a little bit about the book,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, the book is called The Five Types of Wealth. The entire idea, if I'm going to summarize into a couple sentences, is to build a life around the things that you truly care about. And when we talked earlier about me stepping off this path that I was walking down, a big reason that I did that was because I recognized that the scoreboard, the default scoreboard that we all embrace of measuring ourselves on the basis of money, was broken, or at least incomplete. In that money isn't nothing, it simply can't be the only thing. It is kind of a tool, but not the goal. It is one piece of a wealthy life, but it is not the entirety. And you need to create a new scoreboard. You need to measure yourself across the broader war that you were trying to win in life, if you will. If you only measure for this one battle of making money, you may win that battle, but you are very likely going to lose the broader war, which is all about your actual happiness and fulfillment as a human being. And so the book is a guide to doing that, to asking the right questions, to measuring the right things across this broader set of pillars that contribute to a wealthy life. So, the five types of wealth that I cover in the book are time wealth, all about freedom to choose who you spend your time with, how you spend it, when you trade it for other things. It's an awareness of the finite, impermanent nature of your time. Time is your most precious asset. Social wealth is all about your relationships, people around you. It's about your connection to a few deep relationships, and then about your connection to something bigger than yourself through religious communities, through uh, groups, organizations, etc. Mental wealth, all about purpose, about growth, about meaning, about creating the space in your life to wrestle with some of these big unanswerable questions. That can be through religion, that can be through spirituality, through meditation, through solitude. Four is physical wealth, all about health and vitality, your ability to control the controllables in your life to fight the natural decay and atrophy of your body. And then the fifth type is financial wealth, is the wealth that we all know, but with the one lens of really focusing in on your definition of enough, what it means to have enough in your life. With the acknowledgement that your expectations are really your single greatest financial liability. And if your expectations grow faster than your assets, you will never feel wealthy. So the book is out everywhere. Books are sold. Really, I encourage everyone to pick it up because I think it will help you ask the right questions. I think it'll help you measure the right things. And when you measure the right things, you start taking the right actions and you can actually go create the right outcomes in your life.
I love that. For any young man or maybe young woman who is listening to this who is feeling a bit stuck, let's say, not sure where to start, what to do next, if you could give them one piece of advice or wisdom, whether it's from the book or just something that's on your mind right now, what would you say to them?
Reject the default assumptions and the default definitions of success that have been handed to you. Really question those things. Ask the question of yourself, what do you define your success around? What actually matters to you? Not what the world tells you should matter, not what your parents tell you, not what your friends tell you, but what do you actually care about? And then go take action to build your life around those things. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you will never feel successful unless you create your own definition of success.
I love it. Sahil, man. I want to be respectful of your time because I could definitely talk to you for another hour, but I know you got places to go and things to do. So thank you so much for the gift of your time and for your wisdom. I'm excited to read the book. And yeah, man, great to finally chat to you.
Great to finally chat. This was a blast. We went down some incredible rabbit holes, and I'm looking forward to doing this in person soon.
No doubt, man. 100%. Appreciate it.